Policy panel. Welcome to our wonderful space down here at 2044 Franklin. East Bay for Everyone is the resident of this place. We're a pro-housing abundancy organization here in the East Bay, which includes everything of the East Bay: Berkeley, Alameda, Oakland, Walnut Creek, all the way up to Pittsburgh and Richmond and all that. We're grassroots funded. We don't have a whole lot of money. If you want to help out pay for this event that we threw, because stages cost money to rent, there's a donation box up there. Everything here has been pretty much donated through grassroots volunteers. So, welcome. Cool. So this is Catherine at TechEquity, and we're going to start the panel.
Hello, everyone. I am Catherine Bracey, the founder and executive director of the TechEquity Collaborative. We are co-hosting this event with East Bay for Everyone. Thank you, Victoria, and East Bay for Everyone for hosting us. Just a couple of announcements. For those of you who don't know who we are a new organization that is organizing and activating the tech community and tech workers to advocate for policy that will make the tech-driven economy work for everyone. And this year, housing is our big priority area. At the front, we have copies of our housing platform, and on the back of that platform, you can see the 4 issue areas that we are advocating for this year. So please pick one of those up. If you work in tech, please join us. And then just a couple of notes. We have, this is the first event that we're throwing this year. It's also the first in our candidate forum series. We'll be doing more of these throughout the year. But we also have another event coming up on February 8th in San Francisco. It's a documentary screening. You can find information on our website. We're also co-hosting an event called Beloved Oakland 2018. There are postcards up at the front. This is an opportunity for people in Oakland to come together and sort of celebrate our differences. And it will be featuring a concert by a fantastic Negrito, among others. So it would be really great if you could join us for this. It's a benefit to fund some anti-displacement work that's happening in the East Bay. So a couple of event announcements before we hand it over to our fantastic moderator. We do have a code of conduct at all of our events, copies of which are at the front. The basics are essentially this is a safe space for learning, and we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to learn while they're here, so please just keep that in mind. We are at both, you guys are in our C3? C4. Oh, okay, well they can do what they want. We are a C3. So we are nonpartisan, and this event is not meant to be an endorsement of any of the candidates. We're really committed to giving all of the candidates equal time, so I want to make sure that is clear up front. There are 9 candidates running for this seat, so it is going to be a logistical challenge to make sure that we can get all of the candidates saying what they need to say in the allotted time. So having said that, we're only going to focus on 4 of the questions that we have pre-selected and all of our candidates have seen in advance. But they've also all answered the full 8-question questionnaire, which should have been emailed. You should have all gotten that in your email if you registered for the event. If you did not pre-register and you want a copy of that questionnaire, please make sure we have your email address at the front. And if you want to ask a question, so the way this is going to work is Connor, our moderator, who I will introduce in a second, is going to ask each of the panelists a question. They'll have 90 seconds to answer, and then we'll have a little bit of a period where Connor will moderate a Q&A. The way we're going to do this is there are index cards, and where is Ernest? Ernest is going to pass out the index cards, and you will write your questions down. We will collect them and give them to Connor, who will use his discretion on what actually gets asked. That will just make this a little bit more easy and democratic and faster. Okay, so with that, I'm going to introduce Connor Doherty, who is a New York Times economic reporter who covers housing and the West Coast, and we're really honored to have him here doing yeoman's work, making sure that all 9 of these candidates can get their ideas on the table, and you guys can come away feeling that you have a better sense of who's running to represent you. So with that, we will hand it over to Connor.
Hi. I'm used to having a byline, not used to having a microphone, so if I seem sort of nervous, I don't do a whole lot of public speaking, so. My parents are 51-year residents of San Francisco, and I live in the Candidates district, so even though I work for the New York Times, I'm very local. Everyone should subscribe to the New York Times, that's what I have to say. Anyway, I guess people walk up, or? Sure. Okay. Okay, so this first one, just sort of a get to know you, but who are you? Please tell us who you are, because there's not of you. And what's your position on the housing crisis? Pretty much, how did we get here, and how, broadly speaking, how do you think we got here, and how do you think you can help lead us out? Let's start with you, but we're going to start in a different place for a different question.
Hi, good evening. I'm Andy Katz. I'm a city planner by training as well as an attorney and a lifelong resident of the Bay Area. And I'm running for the Assembly because I think we need to provide an urban environment that's more livable for our residents, that's affordable for all of us. And what I've done to be a productive part, also not build housing for decades. I was appointed to the Zoning Adjustments Board and led a new era for Berkeley where we got 2,500 new units of housing, including 20% of that affordable housing. I'm proud of that record, and I think I'm the only candidate here that can really talk about that much housing being developed under that kind of leadership. So what I'm committed to is affordability, livability, ensuring that we have walkable neighborhoods, good quality transit, and that's why I went on to get a master's in city planning, helped expand public transit services for all of us in the community, and I'm also running to protect workers' rights, advance universal access to health care, and protect our environment.
Hey everyone. Hey, my name is Owen Poindexter. I've been helping to push progressive causes and elect progressives for about 10 years now. And I'm in this race because I believe that progressives need to go further and be bolder in advancing our causes and in living our values. And I believe that starts in California with the universal basic income. Now, the housing crisis, we've had a huge influx of wealth into an area that was already heavily tilted in favor of developers and property owners. And the legal system has only gotten more skewed in that direction since then. So we need to protect renters. We need a rapid increase in housing in all levels of income. And we need to adjust how we represent people to better we need judicial protections for everyone in this state to help them stand up to landlords and to developers. And if we do those things, we can start to see a California that welcomes everyone and where everyone can live off the tremendous prosperity that we all share here.
Hi, thanks. First of all, thank you to the organizations hosting this and sponsoring this. Really appreciate that, and it's a great turnout. My name's Dan Kolb. I'm currently an Oakland City Council member in my second term, and I have over 30 years of experience working as an organizer, as an activist, as a public interest and environmental advocate on a range of policy issues, and that includes about 10 years actually working in Sacramento, living here, commuting to Sacramento, on legislation, drafting legislation, negotiating amendments, doing the entire legislative process. I want to take that experience I have in Sacramento, as well as my experience as a two-term city council member, and bring that to Sacramento, back to Sacramento as an assembly member to fight for the issues that we care about most. And on housing issues, obviously we have a clear supply and demand problem. A lot of demand, not enough supply. But the complexities to solve those problems is much more difficult to figure out, although we have a lot of opportunity to do so. Here's some things that I've done already as a city council member. The first legislation I passed, an ordinance, was to require 25% of our so-called boomerang funds, the former funds that we get from the redevelopment being dissolved, for affordable housing. I've been the leader on affordable housing issues as a city council member. I've been a leader on renter protection issues as a city council member. I authored the tenant protection ordinance in 2014, and I will be a leader on housing issues, whether it's affordable housing, all housing for all, or renter protections once I get to Sacramento. I appreciate your support. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Buffy Wicks. I'm born and raised here in California, and I'm coming into the area, tech jobs, and these are good, high-paying salaries. That's a good thing, right? We want high-paying salaries.
We've worked hard to address that. We passed first in the state by right affordable housing.
About myself, I've spent the last 25 to 30 years working with and for the people of this district on a variety of different issues. I started out my career after graduating from planning school working to create housing and to address homelessness, and that's where I started my career, and I've remained committed to making sure that we try to address the inequities that underlie our housing crisis and other crises in this district. What's the cause of housing? I mean, you know, I think all of the other speakers spoke to this to some extent. You know, we have a history of housing policy that excludes poor people from wealthy neighborhoods. If by having single home, having exclusionary zoning that keeps density out of our neighborhoods, we're strangleholded and we can't create more housing. So we have to address inclusionary housing. We have to make sure that we address our zoning laws. We have to look at the places where they're creating more jobs in this area that are creating jobs, which is great, but they're not creating the housing to house those jobs. So we have to make sure that every neighborhood does their fair share in creating the housing for our communities. And it's only through doing that we have to couple jobs with housing to solve this problem.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out on a rainy day. My name is Javanka Beckles. I'm a council member in the city of Richmond. Last 7 years, I've been a council member fighting for tenant rights, fighting for renters. We are where we are because, quite frankly, we don't have enough will. We don't have enough elected officials who are corporate free, who are taking no money from developers, who are taking no money from oil companies, who are taking no money from those folks who are here to displace, particularly communities of color. So that's why in Richmond, for the last 7 years, I have authored or co-authored 8 different items around housing. Authored the item to ban the box for housing, so we have folks coming back from incarceration. They aren't able to get a place to live because of that question on the box. I have authored several bills to include secondary units in Richmond. So we have to tighten up our laws, and we have to have elected officials who are standing here for you. So starting in 1995, we have Costa-Hawkins, right? And so in order for us to change that and to have the housing that we need, we have to repeal Costa-Hawkins, not just fix it, not just reform it, we have to repeal it. So that's where I stand, and that's what I will do, and I'll continue to fight for renters throughout the Bay Area.
Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Pardue Okimoto. I am the Mayor Pro Tem for the City of El Cerrito. I'm running for Assembly because I want to help my community. I have been a nurse for the past 17 years, and in the hospital I've seen a lot of things. And right now, at Alta Bates Hospital, we're about to lose housing. We're about to lose housing for our patients. If the entire hospital closed down, we won't have housing for our patients, and that would be a shame. But to go on to the greater housing issue, there are many reasons why we've gotten into this situation. Starting with federal funding. Federal funding over the last 10 years has decreased by about half. We've gone from about $750 million in grants to about $350 million. over a 10-year period, and that all used to go to housing. We used to have a redevelopment agency. That really helped in little cities like El Cerrito to provide housing. That was also taken away. At the same time, we've seen a tech boom. So we've had more people coming here with all these great jobs, but then not enough housing as a result. So we need to build more housing. We need transit-oriented development. We need accessory development in our homes. And we need general inclusionary policies so that all people can afford to live in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
I'm not even going to try to stand up on this podium with those stilts. Are we starting? Hi, I'm Cheryl Sedith. I'm an activist, I'm a mommy, I'm a community organizer, I'm a disabilities and veterans activist, I am a justice gurera, I'm a warrior for justice. Let me explain something to you that you may not have heard. This housing crisis that we're in, it started long ago, and it started during the Clinton administration when anybody and everybody was allowed to get a housing, was allowed to get funding. Anybody and everybody was permitted to get housing loans, and it disproportionately affected people of color. People of marginalized communities, black and brown people, were approved for loans that they could not afford, and whether their credit was good or not, and their credit at the same level as their white counterparts. And then when they couldn't afford it, they were displaced out of their homes. This started when the HUD administration, under the Obama administration, was giving cities the permission to give people homes, but then they turned them over to the cities, and the cities decided they wanted to get out of being landlords. And then you had cities like Richmond who sold them to private investors, and then those investors decided to get out of it. They sold them, and then they lost those homes, and now we no longer have units. The solution is we need these low, moderate, and market rate houses, and then we can begin to give people homes. But we cannot continue to move along these paths and pretend that this is an organic matter. It's not organic, it's man-made. Thank you.
Okay, so reminder that the index cards are going around, and those are for you to, write your questions, think deeply about them, and then write your one-sentence question or whatever, so that we can read it really easily. Oh yeah, sorry. If you have one, wave it in there. That's what I was supposed to say, but I forgot. Okay, cool. So why don't we start at the end this time with Cheryl. Well, you guys are all running for statewide office. There's been a lot of bills lately, some just proposed, others passed last year, that have where the state is basically trying to step in and kind of guide or impose, whatever your view on that is, localities to build more housing. So our question for you guys running for statewide office is, what role does the state even play in local housing policy, and how do you see that shaping up in office? Cheryl.
We have housing because I want to protect the way that my particular neighborhood looks, or I want to protect the way my neighborhood has a feel. So you can build them in your neighborhood, or you can build it in your area, but I want my neighborhood to have this particular look and feel. And parts of Oakland, and see that sometimes you have to regulate to make sure that we don't have so many houseless individuals in areas that are basically affected by people that look like me, or people who are in impoverished conditions, and say it's fine for them, but it's not fine for me.
So, my answer to this question is yes, and my intuition on answering this question is no, as a city council member, or I should say mayor pro tem now, of a small city. And we believe in small cities and local control. But unfortunately, what's happening right now is that leaving it up, city by city, and kind of district by district, we're not seeing the kind of housing that we need to supply for the entire good of the entire state. So therefore, in this scenario, because we're in a housing crisis, I do believe that the state should step in at this point and go into zoning in areas that are transit rich or near transit. If we can increase the housing density in these areas where it makes sense, where you're near transit, where you're not going to be, adding to pollution by urban sprawl, those are the kind of developments that are necessary at this time. And the housing prices of everybody, and that includes homeowners such as myself, is all going up, and it's because of a lack of supply. So I'm very much in favor of building housing, and in particular building affordable housing so that everyone has a chance to thrive here.
So the state's role has a lot to do with regulating zoning. So in Richmond, we're creative. We are currently exploring land use. We are currently looking at how we can have tiny houses, but recognizing that state policies, of course, supersede municipal policies. And so in Richmond, although we were the first city to pass rent control in 30 years, our hands are tied. Our hands are tied once again because of Costa-Hawkins laws, and that's why it has to be repealed. But other land use regulations comes from the state, and when you elect someone like me who's been a champion for tenants and renters for the last 7 years, we can get the kinds of policies that will enable us to have more affordable housing, to get creative with how we house our homeless population, whether or not we can build tiny houses, whether or not we can build second dwelling units. All of these are at the state level, and we can get that change by, once again, electing individuals like myself who are champions for renters, and working with the community, because we have community members that are on the ground every single day, like ACE, Alliance for Californians, like we have, thank you.
So the question was whether or not the state has a role in zoning, and I think the answer absolutely has to be yes. There needs to be partnership between local, particularly progressive local cities and municipalities that are interested in helping to increase housing stock, to increase affordability, to provide bonuses for building 100% affordable units. We need to make sure that there's opportunities for local people and for local interests and nonprofits to be able to increase the housing stock, and particularly affordability, but also through some other creative matters. But it's up to the state to really guide our policy. And without the state making sure that they are holding these localities responsible and accountable for their fair share, we'll end up with a continuing discrimination throughout the state, with some places building more housing and with some places continuing to serve the very few and wealthy. The question on the questionnaire asked about some places in Marin, but we don't have to look to Marin. We have places in our own district where where it's very difficult to increase density. But what I honestly believe is that if we really want to solve this problem, we are going to have to, some of us are going to have to be a little uncomfortable and allow for housing, creating low-income and affordable units in our areas, and inclusionary housing, so that all of our housing needs are met.
Now, if there was a food shortage and someone's found to be hoarding food, hoarding rice, hoarding bread, there would be incredible penalties. Now, what these communities are doing and have been doing for decades is hoarding land. And land is the #1 resource. It is the first basis of wealth. You know, these our good neighbors, they talk about Republicans and the 1% and the hoarding of the wealth and the and all that, but they're ignoring their own grip upon the land. So absolutely the state has to step in and provide leadership and take over that situation, because this resource hoarding is injuring people. You see the homelessness, and they're projecting in 35 years African Americans are going to have a median net worth of $0. That means owning nothing. That is not acceptable. My proposals call for some very aggressive state leadership over these communities, including a carbon tax on single-family home zones to fund affordable housing, including a cap-and-trade mechanism to make the Lafayettes of the world contribute and pay or integrate. So, yes, thank you.
The answer is yes. The state, I think, has a role in helping to figure out our zoning issues. And if you look at our zoning issues, the exclusionary zoning that exists today has its roots in racist redlining. And you can see it in the neighborhoods that all across this district. And so I think this question really strikes at the heart of SB 827, Scott Wiener's bill, which I support in concept. I know we're still trying to figure out what it will look like, but what it does basically is say that around transit-oriented areas, we need to have more buildings, more homes. And so I think this is one example of what the state can do to make sure that we're able to build both low-income and the middle-income housing that we need, so that our communities that are disproportionately impacted on this, low-income communities, are able to move into these neighborhoods, have access to these good schools, be along transportation corridors, and achieve the American dream that we all should be able to have. Thank you.
It's never 0%, it's never 100%. Of course, the state has some role when it comes to local zoning. I prefer a series of carrot and stick approaches to incentivize, or in some cases, give a stick, penalize those jurisdictions that are not doing what they should be doing in terms of zoning, which leads to more housing, or in some cases, not more housing. Who here understands when I say the term RHNA, or RHNA numbers? Who here knows what I'm talking about? Okay, about almost a half. All right, for those who don't, it's the regional housing needs assessment. These are the numbers that the state tells each local jurisdiction as to how much new housing they're going to need to build over the next X number of years to meet the demand for new jobs and population, both at different income levels, market rate and so on, and down to low, very low. We need to look at those RHNA numbers on a sub-regional level. I don't care if Atherton or Kensington builds more housing. I care that the Mid-Peninsula or Northern Alameda County or West Contra Costa County as sub-regions, I care that they build more housing. If one community wants to work with another community and work together to make sure it's built somewhere in those sub-regions, great. Let's get the housing built and stop worrying about every little jurisdiction and worry about the sub-regional areas where it really matters to have more housing. We also need to expand and strengthen our sustainable community strategy, which is a state law and local implementation. I'm going to work hard to do that as well and get that housing built. Thank you.
Yes, the state absolutely has to have a role in local zoning. I mean, what we're seeing essentially is housing discrimination before we even have a tenant. So the state, has to get in there. It would be nice if we could just rely on local zoning, but what we've seen is that this is just a mechanism for areas that tend to be older and whiter and richer to stay that way. And unfortunately, we've got to get in there and change that. And so I agree with Dan, we could use a carrot and stick approach, but it has to be a pretty strong stick. I mean, we need to create penalties and fees on these regions that are not doing their job in terms of supplying enough housing based on the RHNA numbers, and we could probably do some adjustments to RHNA as well. But if these penalties need to be enough so that one, these counties and however we divided up these areas think twice before blocking more development, and two, no matter which path you take, whether it's more development or the fees, you're part of the solution. And so those funds could go into an affordable housing fund, and we could use that to fund housing and to fund mass transit and to start to move towards something that is the kind of level of development that we need to see. So, thank you.
I also agree that the state plays a very important role in ensuring that, as a state, that our regions are being able to support the demand for housing, not just market rate, but also affordable housing. But we also have to be thinking about the way cities are going to implement these goals and these targets. I strongly support the RHNA alignment, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Alignment Program that Senate Bill 375 got started. It hasn't actually been implemented yet because it set forward this 8-year timeline after the Sustainable Community Strategies got adopted. We're due for that implementation within just a few years. So we're getting very close to that point. But SB 375 left a couple details out. I agree with Councilmember Kalb that sub-regional trading may be an appropriate solution in certain places, but the big oversight, I think, is that it didn't really look at smart places to build. It gave a bit too much discretion to regional councils of governments to kind of suppress the real problem. We do need better production of housing in strategic places. We need a better match of housing where the income levels are most needed, where we need low-income housing. It needs to match where we're having a deficiency in that specific income category of housing. We need to be looking where the jobs are, and to be requiring more housing where those jobs are, and to have a jobs housing match and a jobs housing fit where we have these places. I also think we need state programs that do a better job of facilitating compliance so that we don't have to deal with this in court.
So, in principle, everybody here likes what they, maybe not everybody, but many of the questions people say that in principle they like what they hear. You guys are all for more affordable housing. You guys all think we need to build more housing. And, you know, there's some nitty-gritty about how we get it done. So, I got a bunch of questions here, and they all sort of say some version of the same thing, which is, I pretty much like what I hear, but how are you going to make this happen in the Assembly, and can you be as specific as possible, please? So why don't we start in the middle this time? I guess that's Ben, 4 and 9, yeah, 4, okay. And then why don't we go pass it to the right, and then go to Judy. You give it to Judy.
Thank you, thank you. So, you know, the way you move large systems, and I do this professionally, and I've done it on the council, the way you move large systems is creating circles of buy-in. You know, the easy way to say it is shared prosperity. So, for example, one of my plans, because a big part of my agenda is to create ownership of property. And we've had 3 centuries of land giveaways to the majority population. Now I think it's time for an equitable transfer of land back to the other people. So, one way to do that is by amending the Condominium Map Act. This is kind of wonky, but trust me. Amending the act so you can do retail investment at an early stage and sell those units early. Now what that does, it lowers the cost of capital for developers. It achieves a streamlining process to make building easier. So at the same time that low-income persons get property, developers get to make more money, and at the same time, of course, the builders get to work. So you have 3 tiers of people, including the realtors, all sharing in this prosperity that increases our housing supply and increases the equity of our people. So that's essentially what we've done on council in creating mechanisms for labor to partner with developers to achieve housing production, is creating a sense for total buy-in and, again, shared prosperity. Really shared. Thank you.
So I think, you know, as I mentioned, I think the housing package went a long way, the one that was passed recently in the fall. I think there's some interesting legislation being considered now that I think helps get to some of these questions like 827 and some of the other stuff that Scott Wiener's doing. I think the other big question around this is funding, and how do we fund a lot of these affordable housing projects? We need a lot of resources for that, so I think we need to pass the $4 billion housing bond that's going to be on the ballot this year. I think we should look to create some kind of a California public infrastructure bank that's devoted to funding affordable housing units. I think we should be incentivizing more housing, transit-oriented, walkable housing tied to transportation funds as a way to bring that piece into the equation. And really do everything we can to also sort of streamline the process and make sure that we are holding our local municipalities accountable to reach their goals. And that's a lot of the stuff that the state can do.
Governor Brown signed 15 bills. I supported 14 and was okay with the 15th bill, and that's a good start. We have a lot more to do. I testified on one of those bills, helped negotiate some amendments on that same bill, SB 540, and the League of Cities credits my testimony and the testimony of 2 other people to getting that bill out of a particular committee. So I have experience working on housing issues, not just locally and regionally, but at the state level as well, both recently and years and years and years ago. But there's more we need to do, and we could talk about whether it's more funding, and we have the bond measure on the November ballot. Let's all vote for that. By the way, I'm proud to have the support of State Senator Jim Bell, who is the author of SB3, the State Affordable Housing Bond Measure. There's a lot more we have to do, but the little things aren't going to be enough, even though we should do those as well. We need to bring back redevelopment. I am going to author a law and work with my colleagues to bring back redevelopment. It needs to be reformed from when it was the past 40 years before it was taken away. There were abuses and problems with it, and let's bring it back in a way that reforms it in an appropriate manner with good oversight and jurisdiction and transparency. But it has to come back. Those other things that the legislature has done a few years ago to kind of what they call redevelopment light and enhanced infrastructure districts, those are all fine. Those are not nearly enough. If we're serious about this, bringing back redevelopment is one of the solutions. We have to be honest about that. Thank you.
So we have some heavy political lifts that we need to keep working on and some less heavy lifts. So one of the heavy lifts that we're getting pretty close on is repealing Costa-Hawkins. We had a vote recently on that didn't quite work out because we had a couple Democrats abstain, but we're getting close on that one. The momentum is there, and we need to make that happen because step one here is protecting the people who are currently in their homes. And then we've got some not so heavy lifts, like that $4 billion bond. And yeah, we need to just juice funding right now, because this is a crisis right now, and while we work on those big lifts, like reforming Prop 13, like repealing Costa-Hawkins, we do need to just inject some cash into the situation, perhaps creating a public matching fund for affordable housing in lending, that the state would put money on top of approved lenders. And so affordable housing lenders, or affordable housing development, instead of having to go to 10 different lenders, all of a sudden you don't have to go to as many, and things can start moving along. We should also look into creating the universal right to representation for anyone facing eviction. New York did this, and they've seen many fewer evictions and many fewer evictions filed, because landlords know that they have the power on their side when it comes to legal representation. And most renters don't really know what they're doing once they get to court. So by a combination of these heavy lifts and not so heavy lifts, we can make a lot of progress.
Many of these ideas are very important, and I think the legislature needs to work together to be able to replace some of the tools that we lost with redevelopment, particularly the land banking function. When we have urban blight around the state, we need to be able to allow cities to have that tool to hold financing and be able to invest by correcting those abuses from the past. We also need, like I said, to be able to look at the affordable housing splits within the regional housing needs allocations and clarify that those are state mandates too, not just the overall numbers, but also the affordable housing splits. And it's easier for local governments to raise money or to be able to leverage requirements through inclusionary zoning, through a business license tax affecting landlords, through other local revenues that are easier to raise than the state legislature, because it requires a 2/3 vote for new revenue from the state legislature. So I think emphasizing the RHNA affordable housing splits and enforcing those better is one way to help improve this. I strongly agree with protecting our renters more. We need to have statewide protections and enhance protections against unfair evictions. We need to repeal Costa-Hawkins so that people who are living where they are not getting displaced. I think it's critical that we increase the supply of housing, increase the supply of affordable housing, and protect our renters both through the legal process as well as by providing strength and protections.
It's very creative how he's doing that. So, first of all, we have to protect our renters. So we have to repeal Costa-Hawkins, and we have to make sure that we're putting protections in place so that we're helping people stay in their housing. But that's just a start. You know, I'm on the school board in Berkeley, and so we're looking at workforce housing. And so we've been looking with at different nonprofit housing developers to work with and different ways to possibly finance this. And there are so many barriers to being able to finance affordable housing, even for a single unit for an organization that already has the land. So there's a lot of things that we need to do to help smooth the process. We have to, first of all, deepen our tax credits. There's right now, a lot of affordable housing is paid for through tax credits, but it's still limited. We need to provide incentives to financial institutions to help finance affordable housing and housing. I agree that we all have to stand behind the affordable housing bond that's going to come up. It's a great start, but I think we all know that it's not going to create enough housing to meet the needs for the 3.5 million people who need to have housing. So we're going to have to come up with a multi-strategy plan. One of the things that I'm very excited about is looking at the Resilient Cities project that's currently coming and tying that together with the housing strategy so that we're not only building more housing, it's sustainable and affordable.
So how do we do it at the state level? We have to repeal Costa-Hawkins. We have to repeal the Ellis Act, which allows folks to be kicked out of their homes. Then we have to get creative. We have to get creative and regulate and tax Airbnb because those folks are making lots of money. And we also gotta keep the creativity going and we have commercial landlords who oftentimes on purpose, accidentally, keep their buildings empty. So how about we tax those, right? So we have to get creative, but in our creativity, we really have to make sure that those of us who are already struggling, who are already paying our fair share of taxes, aren't the ones who are going to solve the problem. Like it's not going to get solved on our backs, but it has to get solved on the backs of multi-billion-dollar companies who aren't paying their fair share of taxes.
I like a lot of the bills that were passed this year. I think that the legislature has done a very good job in stuff that we need to do more of, streamlining, making it easier to build. That will increase the supply and definitely help. But we need more bonds. One bond, that will be coming around at the end of the year could raise $4 billion, which will definitely help. But I think we need a continued effort in funding, so we need to have more bonds. But ultimately, I know the city of El Cerrito has been greatly affected by the repeal of redevelopment agencies. So if we can bring forward, again, the redevelopment agency, we can start to build again. A lot of people have asked us in El Cerrito, like, why is San Pablo Avenue look the way that it does? And most people don't realize that for a small city, when they took away the redevelopment agency, it really took away so much of our revenue. And it stifled a lot of small communities, and that stifled the building of housing in so many different communities. In addition, of course, I agree with everyone else, we need to repeal Costa-Hawkins. In order for a small city like my own to really do a good job of rent control, we need that behind us. Thank you.
Si no está sentada a la mesa, no se pueden establecer las prioridades or la agenda. So let me be clear. If you're not seated at the table, you cannot establish the priorities or the agenda. So it doesn't matter if any of this occurs, as long as you have people at that state capitol who are more beholden to the developers than they are to this community, none of that matters. So until you get people who have the will and the desire to build housing for the low, the moderate income people. None of this makes a difference. So what we need to establish is that first. So once we get there, then we can start talking about building low income, moderate income, and then maybe some market rate housing for the people who matter in this community. But we have to start first by making sure we have people who have the political will and the fortitude to make sure that we are representing the people of these communities. We can talk all day long about our plans, we can talk about repeal all day long, but until you start there, none of the rest of this matters.
Okay, so people, their questions have a little tune with them now, so we want to, we're going to ask, can we just do this one really fast? Everyone just like give a quick answer, just like 10, 20 seconds. You don't even have to look at that thing this time. You don't have to fill up the time. Okay. What sticks would you use if city failed to meet their housing needs? Everyone wants to know about the sticks here. So, there's different versions of this question. So why don't we start with Buffy and then go down this way now. But, if states aren't meeting their housing needs, how would you punish them for not building enough housing?
You mean if cities aren't meeting their housing needs?
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I do think we need to have further sticks, and I think this is some of the legislation being considered right now in Sacramento that's looking to do, that Scott Wiener's pushing forth. I think one piece of the equation could be transportation funding, which would, I think, also serve as incentivizing a way for communities to build their house.
Perfect. I said you didn't have to turn that on, but yes, transportation funding. That's a good one. So if you don't build enough housing,
we're going fast.
If you don't build enough housing, you get less transportation funding. You're penalized in some way. Is that a fair interpretation?
Yeah, like incentivizing.
Yes.
Slash stick. Yeah.
Dan, what's your stick? How big is your stick?
No comment on that one.
How hard will you hit the stick? Something like that?
Okay.
How hard will you?
We do need to have sticks, and there is already a spot bill out there to look at to discuss transportation funding as your penalty. I have to be honest with you, there is zero chance that bill is going to pass. I mean, the idea that cities and counties and the people who represent them, the legislators who are going to be voting on that, are going to allow their cities, their communities to put at risk their transportation funding, it's just not going to happen. It may be a good idea. I'm open to that personally, and I might vote for it. I can tell you right now there's zero chance it's going to pass, so we need to find other sticks. I don't know what those are, but I'm happy to look at the Sustainable Community Strategy, which is SB 375, and how that's implemented, and there are some ways to strengthen that law, which would then create sticks as well. So that's what I'm going to look at. Sustainable Community Strategy, SB 375, and the sticks that we could put into that law if we improve it.
Short version, money. Slightly longer version, perhaps state money that is apportioned to cities and counties could be modulated based on how counties and cities are meeting their housing goals or not, based on how many units they're falling short by.
Let's find some new money and say that if you don't have enough housing production, affordable housing production, your city won't have access to this new money. I'd be happy to take existing money, but I think we have political obstacles there. On fixing SB 375 and strengthening it, what we can look at is to say, so cities within a few years that are not complying with their regional housing needs, they're going to get sued. But are judges really going to implement the law? Are judges really going to issue an injunction that says cities, you need to rewrite your zoning ordinance to comply with the law? I think the legislature can do more to explain, yes, this is really what we meant. Here are some findings. Here are some remedies that actually get us from point A to point B. Because this is a big task that the legislature has asked the judiciary to do. The legislature can add some more breadcrumbs to lead the branches of government to make this result happen better.
So you basically, essentially you're saying, make it easier for people to win the lawsuits against cities so that the judges don't have as... What do you mean by that?
So in a writ action against a city, so any private party has a private right of action with attorney fee shifting. It's a very powerful law, what happened in the SB 375 deal. But what's unclear is, well, what does the record of evidence look like? What are the guideposts for, is this a housing unit? Is this amount of land? Is this kind of zoning adequate? Do we just have to rezone and then our hands are off? What does it really mean to be compliant with the regional housing needs allocations? I think the legislature can add some meat on the bones and make it more clear for the judges implementing this law. What does it really mean? I think the Housing and Community Development Department can write some regulations to make it more clear. What does this really mean? And the legislature can help that.
Cool. Pass it to Ben. Ben, how are we going to hit cities?
Well, certainly. So I call for the creation of a series of larger regional affordable housing trust funds. These are like larger bodies that would arbiter funds and bonding funds, debt funds, equity funds, all manner of funds for affordable housing. And so they would be the ones who would arbit the carbon tax allocations or the cap and trade and so forth. So again, so your Lafayette's of the world, the ones who don't build, they get fined unless they build. So fines. Judy?
Yeah. So, I think I actually think that we need carrot and stick programs that provide both incentives and penalties. So I know the question is about the stick, but I think I'm kind of more of an incentive gal. So. I'm a yes person, so I will say that. But I do think that SB 35 had a good strategy as far as a stick. I think, if you want to call it that we all have to live up to our requirements or our commitments to build the housing, both market rate and affordable. And if we don't, that we can streamline the process. So I think that was an effective stick. And I think we can continue, we can see how that works and look at some other options.
Fines and rewards. And so in Richmond, redevelopment went away for everyone, sorry. So in Richmond, what we do, before we even accept a contract from a developer, they have to agree to a certain percentage of affordable housing. Otherwise, they don't get the contract. Then you also we have in lieu fees as well. And so if a developer decides, well, we don't want any affordable housing, well, then they're going to pay a hefty fine for that. And with the money that we get from that fine, we then are now able to build more affordable housing. And I think that should be the case as well at the state level.
I agree that in cities such as El Cerrito, if the state were to come to us and say, hey, if you don't get your housing in order, we're going to change the zoning on where we think that you should build. And most cities want to keep their local control. So that would definitely be a stick. However, cities such as El Cerrito are also doing the best that we can. We're doing very good with affordable housing, with low-income affordable housing, but we're having a hard time with that, what's called the missing middle. So the people in between, it's hard to, as they say, pencil out well for a development that's more moderate. So I would also be encouraging the state to, provide some sort of incentives or help to get us with that missing middle portion so that we meet our standards.
I'm having a hard time with this question because everybody up here is using the word affordable. And so, first of all, we need to define the word affordable because what's affordable at $50,000 is not the same thing as what's affordable at $1.5 million. And so, low income is not the same thing in El Cerrito as it is in North Richmond, as it is in Deep East Oakland, as it is in Kensington or North Berkeley or North Oakland. So let's just be real and say that the state needs to define affordable once and for all, and it needs to define low income once and for all and middle income. Because what we've discovered, especially in Oakland, is that the definition of affordable is 67%, whereas the average person who's trying to come into that Section 8 housing is only making 67% of that at $46,000. And so when we go into that and you're having these developers come and build at that so-called low income level, people aren't even able to move into those units So when you're talking about trying to find people or trying to get this carrot or stick or whatever, you're already falling behind, and so you're trying to find them, but what are you finding them for? Because you've already put them behind the curve. Because if the people who they're building for are already 67% of below the amount that you're building for, you're already putting them at a disadvantage. So first of all, you need to define what that means. Affordable, low income, moderate income, and market rate speaks for itself. But we gained over 90,000 low income, hold on just a minute, Connor. We gained over 90,000 low income, quote unquote, jobs in this area. Households in this area. But we lost over 200,000 units of low income housing. In order to make that up, it has to be mandated that these developers do it. And if they don't do it, then they shouldn't be allowed to build in these areas. So we need to give them a percentage, and we need to say, you have no choice but to build in this area, and in order to do it, this is what has to be done.
Okay, we have to, thank you. So, okay, we are going to, we're going to move on to another question. So, one of the things we always forget is that this community has an amazing run of great fortune. The biggest, most valuable companies in the world, tons of jobs. The unemployment rate around here is like 3% or something. And there's a lot of communities in the United States that don't have any jobs. The housing's really cheap there because nobody wants it. And we kind of forget that sometimes our problem, our crisis in this part of the country is that everything is going too well and too many people think it's too awesome to be here. So the question is, how do we tackle housing displacement while still accommodating growth, while still giving people a chance to get these great jobs, to go from being the son or daughter of a service person to maybe an executive someday because the company happens to be just down the street. These are opportunities that people have here in this region that aren't available to people in a whole lot of other cities. So I guess the question I think we're asking is, how do we keep that growth and all those opportunities here and keep providing more opportunities for the next generations while still kind of protecting against displacement? Let's start with Judy.
Can I get a...
Yeah.
Oh. So, this is a really good question, and are we timing? Yeah, I'll just keep talking. So, there's two questions in this. One of them is how do we prevent displacement and how do we keep people in the housing, but then how do we also make sure that there's a robust development going on and that we're encouraging people to come in and continue to build. Because in my opinion, we need to continue to build. We need more market rate housing. We need more affordable housing. We need more low income housing. We have to increase our stock. And so it's true. I mean, it's also a little deceptive to say that things are so good here that everybody wants to move here. I think that's also is what leads obviously what leads to the displacement. So one of the things that we have to make sure to do is that the companies that are benefiting so much from that this is such an awesome place to live, that we live in one of the best places in the country, is to make sure that they are participatory and invested in making sure that we're building more housing. So I really think that one of the things that we have to help legislate at the state level and we have to help encourage here at the local level is that collaboration. One of the things that I hear here is, we need the people who are going to build the housing. It is really difficult to build housing. It's hard to make it pencil out. So we have to make sure that we are holding those developers accountable, but we're also incentivizing their being able to build the housing so that we have places for people to live.
Javon, and so...
Did I not answer the question?
No, I'm trying to liven it up a bit here, but while not being disrespectful. So don't. I'm gonna take my slow way anyway. Javonka.
Well, there's no need to reinvent the wheel necessarily. I'm from Richmond. I've been a city council member in Richmond for the past 7 years. And the housing displacement that you're seeing happening in the Bay Area is the reason why we're seeing traffic is starting to look like LA, because people can no longer afford where they work. And so they're having to move farther and farther away. And now we're having these ridiculous traffic nightmares. And so in Richmond, we have some beautiful, wonderful people who were born and raised there, or some of them went off to college and want to come back to Richmond. But they've done the work. And as some of you may know, Richmond has turned around. Richmond is a beautiful city now because of innovative policies. And those policies didn't come necessarily from me or any of the other progressive council members. They came from listening to the community who were saying, we helped turn this city around. We don't want to have to move. And so it was because of that problem that we as a city council, we implemented rent control. And then the apartment association, then they came in and got petitions and repealed it, and so it went to the voters. But the reason we were able to do that is because we realized that rents are out of control, and really that's the problem. You tackle it by having statewide rent control, repealing Costa-Hawkins and the Ellis Act.
Okay, so, and I just want to kind of focus on, I guess as we answer these questions, to kind of just think about, I don't know, I guess your relationship to growth. Is it a good thing? Do we want to keep helping companies expand here as long? Some people in this community here will say, we just need to grow more slowly. And if that's your position, please just come out and say that, because I feel like people here it's a difficult question, how we deal with, again, this abundance of good fortune. Anyway.
I'm still for growth. I just think that we need to accommodate the growth. So, and one of the things I think that I feel like has been lacking a little bit from this discussion is, we do have some new housing going in, but, we're also seeing such a huge increase of homeless people. And so what I would like to see more of also built immediately is, emergency housing, some sort of shelter, something for people to get into now. And I know that maybe that might not be the perfect permanent solution for every single person, but at least, when I was driving over here and I saw homeless people, I just thought, wow, what an awful night to be out on the street. I spent a very brief time as a child homeless, living out of a car, so I know what it's like to really rough it. So we need to do more in our cities, and I think that we're doing what we can in our little town of El Cerrito. We're building housing for our seniors. We're going to start inclusionary zoning. We're working on that right now so that our new developments will have more affordable, sorry, lack of a better term, housing, and it will go by, some of it will go by what percentage you have, oh my time's up, what percentage you have as income. So we're working on it, but more needs to be done.
Thank you. Yes, I'm for growth. I just think we need to be more intentional with what we do. I believe that we need to move away from the typical Section 8 type of environments and more into an inclusive community type of environments where we're building communities that are centered around transit, where transit is needed. Right now, transit centers are built around people who can afford cars to get to the transit centers, where, for instance, in Richmond and El Cerrito and Berkeley, the transit centers are in places where people have to either walk long distances or drive to them, rather than where, like in the Midwest where I grew up or back east, you build apartment buildings and around the actual transit centers, which I know is the intent of the new bills that are being passed. But in those transit centers, it should be where you have maybe a 10, 20, 70 split with low, moderate, and market rate housing. And along with that, you have true grocery stores and dentists and amenities for those families and everyone else, so that you have a community within a community, and your focused, intentional growth so that people are able to walk to and have all of the amenities there within walking distance, so you're managing that community within that community.
Thank you. Let me say for the record that I come from a long line of people that represent growth and opportunity. So I don't want to check growth at all. I want to shape it and share it. The reason I decided to run for this office here, why I took the plunge, is because one of my constituents came to see me after a long time. It turns out she had been displaced from Berkeley through an owner move-in. And now she was living out in Antioch. And she came to see me because I'd gotten her a job a couple years before in the city. But it turns out that now, because she's living out there, her commute is so brutal that she got fired because she was late too many times. So when we talk about how do we incorporate people into growth, you have to address that story, that situation. You have to, what I call the 3 Ps. You have to produce, in this case, 3.5 million units of housing, but you also have to protect people that live where you make the housing. And the housing has to be near the opportunity. Can't be a 3-hour bus ride. You won't make it. So for shared prosperity to occur, we must have the ability to protect communities and let them be connected physically in proximity to opportunity that we should encourage, because that's how we get out of poverty, that's how we turn our state around, that's how we fund our incredible fiscal needs that we're going to be facing in the next few years. Thank you.
Is anyone else freezing? It's so cold. We don't have heat, okay. So I think we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. And what that means is I think we need to be able to build more housing, low and middle income housing. I think there's a lot, we've talked about that, streamlining the approval process, working on some of our zoning issues, but I also think we need to do everything we can to guard against displacement. And so I think there's 3 things specifically that I mean when I say that. I do think we need a fix for Costa-Hawkins, and the fix that I think could work would be something to the effect of a rolling date. 1995 is very arbitrary. If we looked at something maybe like a 20-year rolling date, I think that would enable local municipalities to implement more rate stabilization measures, while at the same time making sure that we're not halting new production of housing that we need to be able to accommodate for the growth, Connor, that you mentioned. Secondly, I think we need to put money in people's pockets that are renters. The renter tax credit increase, I think, is one way to do this. 3 out of 4 Californians are about $700 away of slipping into poverty if there's some sort of emergency expense. Putting real money into people's pockets, I think, would be helpful, looking at maybe like a 10-fold increase of the renter tax credit. And the third thing would be a legal defense fund set up for renters who are facing unfair evictions. There's been some pilot programs done in this regard, and it really levels the playing field for renters who are facing unfair evictions to take on landlords who are doing unscrupulous activity. So those are some of the specific ideas that I'd bring to the table.
There's an elementary school in my district a couple years ago, a little over 2 years ago, where a new teacher, everybody loved her, she was great, doing a great job. She couldn't find anywhere to live, anywhere in or near Oakland. After a number of months, we lost her. She went to East Contra Costa or Solano County or something like that, and she's working in the school district there because housing was too expensive and that's just one example that's happened over and over again. So there's a lot we have to do. I absolutely support the repeal of Costa-Hawkins. If that doesn't succeed, I've already drafted months ago a substantial reform bill for Costa-Hawkins, but the community, the tenants community around the state wants to go with a full repeal. I support that effort. I'll be voting for that. I've signed that ballot measure. Let's get it on the ballot and make it happen. If that fails, we'll come back with a reform measure as a strong compromise. I've already drafted that bill. There's a lot more we have to do. It's a dichotomy. There's protecting the people who live here already, mostly renters who need most protections, and there's building new housing. Okay, on tenant protections, I'm proud of my record in Oakland of being one of the leaders to create new tenant protections in Oakland, and we can take some of those statewide. But there's more we have to do, and we need to be very strategic about what more we can do at a statewide level to give local jurisdictions more ability. In terms of new housing, we need housing at all levels of government, at all income levels, but we also need to make sure the housing, some of it is family-sized housing. It can't just be studios and 1-bedrooms. We need 2s and 3 bedrooms in our new housing units so we have housing available for all people so they can live closer to where they work. Thank you.
So I like how you frame that question, because it should be good news that all this money, all this wealth is coming to this area. That should benefit everyone. And I've heard there's an idea called basic income that might help with that, but it's another topic. But it's not good news right now, because so many people are suffering due to soaring rent increases and everything we're talking about, displacement. At the same time, I feel like it's a false dichotomy to say that should we lean more toward growth or more toward protecting renters, because in the long run, we can absolutely do both. There is no reason why we can't have all the growth that we need to accommodate everyone coming here and who wants to live here and who already is here, while at the same time making sure we have very strong renter protections. And so if we have to do one in the short term, I think we need to protect people who are currently in their homes. We need strong renter protections. We need to repeal Costa-Hawkins. And we need to help fight against evictions. But like everyone here is saying, we all want growth. And also the idea of slow growth, I think, is maybe seductive, but is just going to lead to exacerbating what we're experiencing right now and not enough housing. So we need market rate, affordable, low income, and also no income housing to make sure everyone can stay here.
I think it's about a strategic approach to growth. Looking at our sub-regional centers and looking at how do we make sure that people aren't commuting hours and hours to get to work within the outer corners of the Bay Area into the central cities, but to look at sub-regional centers and how are we making sure that we have enough jobs that match the skills and the talents of people in each of our sub-regions. We should be having more job opportunities in our sub-regions, like in downtown Oakland. It's important because the Transbay Tube is nearly at capacity. If we have more jobs in downtown San Francisco before we build a new Transbay Tube, which I think is a good idea, it's a good investment to have more infrastructure in transit and mass transit especially. But if we don't have the capacity to actually get people to where they need to go, then we're going to have a much bigger problem. So I think we need to look at our subregions and plan very strategically to have matches of commercial job opportunities as well as residential. On top of that, we need to look at the workforce and think it's not just about providing subsidized housing for affordable, diverse incomes. It's not just about protecting tenants to avoid displacement. We need to have minimum wage laws that keep up with being able to allow workers to afford the rent, afford basic needs. So we need to provide minimum wage restrictions. We need to have living wage incentives and have a combination of strategies to be successful.
Okay, cool. So this is a very educated audience here. How many people here are curious about SB 827? Can you raise your hand? Yes, okay. So by far the most popular question. So everybody here already knows this, but for those who don't already know this, SB 827 is this bill that would make it very, very difficult for cities to block housing near transit stops. And I'm sure that some people think, I'm trying to read the room here, I think some people think that if this were to happen in a place like Orinda, where there's a giant parking lot around them, they would think that's great. Again, maybe not everyone, but, and then people get a little worried about it when they think about it in like downtown Oakland or something like that. So is that a I don't know, is that a fair summary of how a lot of people feel about it?
No, it's complicated.
Okay, that's fine. But anyway, well, Ben keeps saying the Lafayette's of the world, and I don't want to pick on them anymore, but anyway, so I guess I want to ask this question this way. What's your position on SB 827? I know you've already answered this. If the answer is just, I support it, great, just say that and maybe quick why. If the answer is, I don't support it, no, that and why, you know, quick one. And then if you support amending it, you know, oh, maybe if it, can you kind of be specific about how that would be, yes, if, or, you know, okay. So we will start, did we start with Buffy last time?
Start with last time.
Okay, so start with Buffy. I'm going either or down.
Or,
yes.
I'm happy to start, but if you...
Oh, okay. I was working my way out from the center. Wait, so... Oh, you already did? Okay, so you said you did. I'm sorry. No, Javanka did. Yes, so I'm... You see the sequence here? Okay.
Yes, I support it if, with some amendments. However, this was one of those bills that prior to this I wanted to make sure I understood clearly, and so I made some notes around it, and I think that, you know, we know that it takes into account the need for denser building, right, in communities, but it also has to take into account environmental issues, so that we build around public transportation. And so I bring it back to Richmond because I think that, you know, having concrete examples is how it works. We have to build where people, someone mentioned it earlier, we have to build where people can get to the transportation easily, and that's what we did in Richmond. Most of our development, we believe in infill development. We don't want to build on the shoreline. We want to build where folks can, you know, easily assess.
So what kind of amendments would you want specifically to?
That's what I'm saying. Is like I would, if the amendment includes, you know, more strict environmental policies, so that we don't have, you know, so that we can decrease the amount of greenhouse gases that we're already expending into the atmosphere.
Cool. Cheryl? I'm sorry, not Cheryl. I know, I have it here. Rochelle.
Rochelle, yes. So I support it, and we are doing a lot with transit-oriented development in El Cerrito. And one of the things that I thought of when I read this was, I meet with a couple of other elected ladies from around the Bay Area that are kind of newer to their councils as well. And we've been talking about housing at our little lunches that we have together. And it was really interesting because we're so proud of how much development we're doing in El Cerrito and all the plans that we have. And yet in other communities, they have just maybe one apartment building that they're trying to get near a BART station. And there's these, you know, protests and outcry from what it seems like the majority of the people there. So, you know, in communities like that, I see it as both a classist and a racist thing. It seems like, and it seems just crazy to me because, you know, we're talking about teachers here. We're talking about nurses. We're talking about daycare providers just wanting to live in the communities that they serve. So I think that this is, like I said, one of those scenarios where you take away local control and you have the state intervene because there are just communities that are not doing their fair share.
Cool.
So I support it with the caveat that it specifically is 30, 40, 30. So the 30% low, no income, 40% moderate, and 30% market rate. And I go with that mix because the people who are most in need of accessing transportation are the elderly, people with significant disabilities, single families, students. People who need that access to transit need to be able to walk out of their door and go and use that transit services. We can look at MacArthur BART station, we can look at the Fruitvale station, we can look, especially MacArthur BART. If you look at MacArthur BART, the building the apartment building that's being built there was sponsored by local unions. And that is a perfect example of a public-private project that is along the lines of what we're talking about.
So you support it if there are hard caps on the amount of affordable housing, hard, you know, floors for the amount of affordable housing that's in the
A
development?
recommendation.
Yeah, okay.
A recommendation. An incentivized recommendation is what I'm going to call it.
All right, so it goes to Ben now, I think?
Yeah, so, that, but what I'm saying is that's the kind of thing we need to make sure, because those communities, those marginalized communities, are typically left out of the mix when you're looking at that type of building, right?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, no, never mind, Judy.
Oh, the women's. So I'm a huge proponent of transit-oriented development. I think that it
Wait,
is
can you
really...
start by saying you're a yes or a no or maybe?
Oh yes, I support this legislation. I think it needs some amendments, and I think there are amendments that that the authors are thinking about. I think we need to make sure to include protections against displacement. We need to include affordability guidelines. I think that there is a great opportunity here to use this bill as kind of visionary vehicle to help create the kind of transit-oriented developments that we want to see. I think there's so much opportunity to have not just housing, but also kind of community hubs around transportation, around BART stations or other transit hubs. I live near the Ashby BART station, and it's been really difficult to get a good project going at Ashby, and I live right there. I would welcome a high-density, thriving kind of community center at the Ashby BART station, but there's a lot of effort, there's a lot of opposition that stops that. So I think that there's a way that we can, through this bill and through other measures, to really build transit-oriented developments that incorporate our core values around what we want our cities to look like in the future.
All right, Ben, you're a yes, a no, or maybe?
Well, I would support it if there was a space heater here. Yes, you know, I support it. I think it's a very, I like its moxie. I think it's aggressive. I think it's creative. However, the caveats that I would need to support it would be around displacement issues. So a right of return, relocation assistance, or an income strata for tenants in the new buildings. Because you see, what it looks like from our point of view is, you know, you raise the heights over places where all the tenants live in the state, and it immediately creates a gold rush where they live, and owners are incentivized to kick them out and build, right? So we want to make sure that, again, we have production, but we also have protection. And I think the balance here is lacking in the current version. We need protection. So when you come down from the 30,000 foot view down to the rooftop, down into the living rooms, you see that person, that senior citizen, you see that person in the wheelchair, you wonder where they're gonna go, right? So I support it with those two caveats: right of return, relocation assistance, and possibly an income strata defined by the state. Thank you.
So I've already spoke out on this bill. We'll see how it goes through the process, where the sort of amendments take us, but in concept I support anything that really promotes transit-oriented housing. I think that this bill is great at striking at the issue around exclusionary zoning, which is something I think that we need to address. I would like to see some displacement measures put into this, but I think it's a bold measure by Scott Wiener. He's endorsed my candidacy. I love to work with him in Sacramento, as well as David Chu, who's also endorsed my candidacy. But I do think, on balance, it's a really exciting bill. It's really setting a bold vision of what I think we need to do here in California, and I look forward to the debate.
SB 827 is going to be amended at least 10 times with probably a total of 50 amendments or more.
You're a yes, a no, or maybe?
Yeah, I'm getting that.
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to, get everyone...
No, he's a journalist. He's doing what he's supposed to do.
Thank you. You should see the questions. They all...
My guess is I will end up supporting it if the amendments that happen over the next few months up into through August are positive, and I guess they're going to go in the right direction. I will probably end up supporting it. Right now, it's support if amended, which at this point in January is probably what most people's positions are. Some are opposed to it. I've been a strong proponent, active proponent of transit-oriented development. I'm the one who shepherded through the MacArthur Tower that's going to be built at MacArthur BART Station. Thank you. And I'm very excited about that. That whole village is important. There's affordable housing included in that. This bill needs to have an required affordability component. It needs to have some level of design review still in place. We don't want a bunch of fugly buildings, all right? We want more density, but a sense of place and good-looking buildings that fit the community are important. You can have good-looking buildings and a sense of place and more density. We absolutely need that. And we have to make sure that we know what a definition of a transit hub really is. We have to make sure we're careful about the definition. Essentially, this bill could be like density bonus on steroids in a good way. And that could be a very good thing because we need more density, especially on our key transit hubs, and I'm going to support that effort overall. Thank you.
Owen?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as everyone else. I do support the bill. I do think it needs a couple of amendments around affordability and protecting people from displacement. And also, we should add in there, maybe not in this bill, but in general, we do need ongoing improvements of our transit system. I haven't ridden the new BART cars yet. I've heard good things, but it shouldn't be like once a decade. It's like, whoa, we've got new cars and there's 5 of them and you get to ride them if you're really lucky. This should be something where, like, every year we get, a new station or faster cars or something that doesn't feel like we have a system from the 1960s, which we do. So we need, as we increase density, we need to make sure that we can handle that density. But I do like this proposal. I do like that it's bold and radical in some ways, because that's what we're going to need to actually solve the housing crisis. A lot of what we talk about is making things less bad and kind of chipping away at a problem that we should have dealt with many years ago and not really getting there. This is something where it looks toward a future where we could actually start to solve this crisis, but it does need those amendments.
Yes, I would support the bill if it had a good series of amendments that I think are needed to ensure that we avoid displacement and equity issues, that we ensure protection of the environment. I'm thinking about the intertransit terminal in the city of Hercules, which is right on the shoreline. And I'm also thinking about places like the Fremont BART station near Newmy, where it's a completely industrial area. Wouldn't you be thinking about, is it a sense of place? Is it a place where people can live and actually walk around a neighborhood serving services? So I think if we can integrate those ideas, integrate it into SB 375, and ensure that we're able to facilitate local governments building sustainable communities, then yes, we should be having that vision of transit-rich, supportive housing all over our state. So we need stronger tools at the state level to be requiring this kind of thing. I was a strong proponent in downtown Berkeley to develop thousands more units in the downtown Berkeley area with our new downtown area plan. Some of those buildings are 16 stories tall, and I think that the scale of each BART station area, each transit area is going to be a little bit different depending on the character of that area. But I'm proud to live and work in the downtown Berkeley area where we have that kind of transit-rich environment.
So, a lot of questions here. Everyone feels like you guys agree on everything, and so and everyone feels like there's 9 of you, and so I keep getting.
Like there's 9 of us.
Yeah, exactly. So the question I keep getting versions of is this: what distinguishes you from the other people on the stage? Basically, what distinguishes you from everyone else on the stage on housing? And I guess we start with Rochelle this time. Why should you be different from the other 9 people that agree with you on everything?
Well, yeah,
according to the cards.
Well, I agree. It's kind of difficult. I have heard a lot of agreement up here, I think, and if you read our questionnaires, I think they were probably also very similar. You know, for housing, for me, I think we all bring our personal stories. Like I shared with you earlier, I had a lack of housing. I've lived in inadequate housing. And then I've been very fortunate as an adult to have, gone through our educational system, received Cal grants from the state so that I could stand here before you today. And I worry about housing. I worry about housing because I'm a mother. I have 2 sons, and I wonder what the future is going to be like for them. Will they even be able to stay here in the Bay Area? Will they be able to ever buy a home? Or even at this point, rent an apartment. I have a friend here with me today whose daughter is in her mid-20s, and her and all of her friends are working 3 jobs, and they can't even afford to get their own apartment. They're sharing apartments, and that's if they can find it. So I think that what makes us different is probably what we're going to bring to the table. Our own life experiences in regards to housing, my experience of being with the El Cerrito City Council and trying to bring housing to our city, trying to do our part. We're working on it, and it's a very serious topic. So I feel like it's kind of a downer, a little bit of a forum. Everyone out there looks kind of bleak. I feel like we're, answering the same questions over and over again. But I look forward to the next forum where we have more topics. But
I think the 10th.
Okay. But like I said, I think we're all going to bring our own stories to the table, and I hope that resonates with you.
I think Rochelle and Javanka did the best with the coats.
I know.
Yeah, you look very comfortable.
Yeah, but I have to hand one.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
She's been sharing.
I've been sharing.
Yes.
That's worth a campaign contribution if you give me some of those.
What makes me different? What makes me different is this. There was a saying that I heard that says, anyone can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up. I deal with housing from the grassroots level. And let me explain what that means. I participate in the Racial Justice Coalition, the East Oakland Collective. Thank you, Candace. I know I just saw her come in here somewhere. And in every single city in this district, which I consider one community, and working on housing from an equity standpoint, because I see the lack of housing not just as a social issue, it's a social justice issue, it's a civil rights issue, it's a racial justice issue, and I look at it from that lens every single time we're dealing with it. And for me, it's not a campaign issue, it's not a political issue. This is an issue that has to do with what we need to do every single day. I have 3 children. My oldest son is an MBA student. My younger son is a civil engineering student who's dealing with urban planning. And my daughter is getting ready to graduate high school. I'm a mother who cares about this community, and that's what we have to bring to the table. That human aspect. This has nothing to do with politics. This has to do with how we rear this community, and that's what I'm vested in. Thank you.
Javanka, yeah, and just go ahead.
So what distinguishes me from all the rest? Because we all pretty much believe in the same thing. Housing is a human right? We all believe that. We all believe we need more affordable housing. But what distinguishes me from the other candidates, I'm the only one who brought rent control to her city. I'm the only one who worked hard. We had a program called Richmond Cares, and we were going to help underwater homeowners during the housing crisis. We established that program to help underwater homeowners, where we were the first city to ever use eminent domain. And so instead of for developers, we were actually using eminent domain to save people from losing their homes. So that's what distinguishes me. What also distinguishes me is because I take no money from corporations, I take no money from developers, I'm able to best represent the people. And I work closely with community-oriented organizations every single day. The Alliance of Californians for Community Environment, so ACE, they have endorsed my candidacy. That's what distinguishes me. I'm endorsed by so many community-oriented organizations that you know you can trust me to continue to work on your behalf in Sacramento.
So there's several things that distinguish me. First of all, I have deep experience. I got my planning degree with a focus on housing and have been working on housing issues on and off for the last 25 years. When I first got out of law school, I worked at the Coalition on Homelessness and was on the board of the Community Housing Partnership, where I helped develop exits to poverty and homelessness and helped develop housing. More recently, I've been working, like I said, for teacher housing in Berkeley. So I have experience. I'm a lifetime learner. I am here to listen to everybody, to bring people together. I have deep experience with collaboration. That's the third thing. I'm very good. I'm skilled at bringing people together at the table and coming up with innovative, creative solutions to make a difference. And, you know, a part of that has to do with my maturity. I've been doing this work for a really long time. And I think that the best way to come up with the most progressive solutions are when you really bring people together and find out where their points of commonality are, and then you work from that place. I also, and this doesn't make me unique, I think a lot of people up here have this, but I have a lot of heart. So I think you have to do this work really with a deep commitment and love for the people in our community, and do it really with the caring for helping people to get the housing and the housing and the jobs and the community that they need. And the fifth thing that I have that nobody else has here is my mother in the audience. So I want you to give my mom a little applause, because I've got my 80-year-old mom here, El Cerrito resident. Thank you very much.
Got my mom.
Moms, yes, yes. You know, my life was really nice. I had a good time. You know, I'm an environmental lawyer, travel, have a good time, until my life was turned upside down when a developer bought my mother's apartment building, where she and her friends were all retired senior citizens, retired school teachers, and immediately turned the heat off and turned the water off and subjected these seniors to hellacious treatment, and many of them left. And as I sought out senior housing for my mother, I discovered there was none. There was a 15-year wait list or something. It was absurd. And at that minute, I decided to seek public office for the first time for city council in order to fix that. And since then, it's been a constant battle to create housing. That's why I'm in office, is for housing. And the irony is not lost to me that my grandfather was the first black realtor that moved many of the African Americans into the East Bay, that his daughter was subjected to horrific treatment. So now in city council, I've worked hard to write more than 30 pioneering laws, many of them around housing. So, I mean, my slogan is everyone in the East Bay deserves a home. That's on my posters. It's like a tattoo on my life. So what you have here with me is a deep conviction coupled with hardcore skills. Thank you.
So I grew up in a trailer. I actually grew up in a trailer park, and when I was little, I remember being embarrassed about inviting friends over. I always wanted to go to their house. And I had this dream my whole life of having a wooden house, which seems kind of like a weird dream for some people, because most of you probably grew up in a wooden house. But to me, that was such a luxury. And so I know what the feeling is like, and I know my parents struggled for many years of how are we going to be able to afford, the basic standard of living. So I get where a lot of you come from. And I know what that experience is like. I think what I bring to the table is, on the policy front, how do we figure out how we can both build the homes that we need to, build the low-income, middle-income, missing middle, upper market, all of the housing that we need, while also guarding against displacement for vulnerable communities? And how do we create practical public policy solutions to address both of those things and walk and chew gum at the same time? I also think my approach, I've helped pass bold progressive public policy. I worked for President Obama. I helped pass the Affordable Care Act. I helped create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I've done a lot of big things. I want to take that experience to Sacramento. I want to work with people like Gavin Newsom and Scott Wiener and David Chu and a lot of the great folks that have endorsed my candidacy to pass these public policies to help people. And I want to work with grassroots activists because I know that is the only way that we make change in this country is with the grassroots, and that's why I'm doing house parties all across this district. And if you want me to come to your living room, I will show up. You can have me in your living room, so please come see me.
I've not only talked the talk, I've walked the walk, and I'm not discounting all the work that people have done or all the things that they're advocating for. 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, I was subject to an owner move and eviction, so I know what it feels like to be kind of kicked out of what was your home at the time. Ever since then, even before then, but certainly ever since then, I've been working on policy issues, policy matters, dealing with renters' rights and getting more affordable housing built. As a city council member, I've been a leader on affordable housing issues. I told you about the first law I passed to get 25% of our former redevelopment funds back guaranteed into affordable housing. I authored the 2014 tenant protection ordinance in Oakland. I've been a leader on a range of tenant protections. I got more money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, into a fund in Oakland to fund legal assistance for low-income tenants who are at risk of being displaced. So I've been working on these issues for a long time, but I also know that being a state legislator, it's not about fancy schmancy press releases or glitz and glory. It's about a lot of good, hard, often behind the scenes, tedious work on a lot of complex policy matters. And my record, both before being a council member and now as a council member, shows that that's something I'm very good at. And I want to take those skills, the experience I have on housing issues and other issues, bring that to Sacramento, work on the policy details, which is what it takes, and get some real policy, big policies passed for the entire East Bay and the entire state of California. Thank you.
So for me, I am deeply focused on root causes. Now we sort of talk up here like we're going to be elected emperor and we can just kind of do what we want once we're in there. But the reality is that there are political forces that would prevent quite a lot of what we're talking about up here. The failure to repeal Costa-Hawkins recently is a perfect example of that. So one thing that gets very little play in these debates is campaign finance reform. That was the first issue that I worked on as an activist. And that is behind every single other issue. So much of what we do is blocked essentially by money and politics. Poverty is another root cause issue, and this is something I'm very focused on right now, and I think we should deal with directly through a basic income. And if we do that, then we are going to start to open up how things work a bit more. And the good ideas can actually get through, and people can actually pursue opportunities that they want. People can actually stay in their homes. So we need to be focused on not just the symptoms, because a lot of what we talk about is symptoms. We need to go further and further down until we find the root causes, and that's what I'm very good at.
The housing crisis is what brought me into activism. It's from the experience of living in overcrowded housing that brought me to lead protests at UC Berkeley to build more student housing, to get involved in the Berkeley community, to make sure that no tenant would suffer from unlivable conditions like lack of heat or dangerous exposure to fire hazards or other health and safety violations. To make sure that Berkeley was facing and confronting the challenges of regional housing shortage by building more housing, by strengthening its affordable housing policies. And that's what I did as a member of the Zoning Adjustments Board for 5 years. After that, I've served for 12 years in local government on the East Bay Mud Board of Directors in regional government. And so that kind of experience, having dedicated my early career to housing activism, earned a city planning master's degree where I got expertise in housing and transportation issues. I've worked as a project manager for an affordable housing developer. So that kind of experience is, I think, what it's going to take to be able to write these laws, get into the details in Sacramento, and be able to accomplish the goals of more housing, protecting our renters, and ensuring a livable future for California. That's what I will be doing in Sacramento, and I look forward to putting my expertise to that good work.
Can everybody give a big round of applause for them for breathing for you?
Yeah, thank you guys for spending your evening with us and for all the voters in the audience, you as well. So I think maybe, I don't know if you guys are too cold to stick around to answer some of the lingering questions, but if you are, please do. There's still food and drink. And then Tori has one final announcement here.
Yeah, it's cold as heck in here. We're a scrappy nonprofit. We don't have money. This used to be a bank building, and banks being the thing that they are, they walked away with the boiler when they left. So, one last thing is the East Bay Young Democrats that are having their ballot box back there for nominations tonight. If you're an East Bay Young Democrats member and you want to vote on a nomination, they've asked me to tell you to drop it in the box back there. So thanks for coming to our panel. Thanks for hanging out here and enjoying the cold and the candidates and the housing politics, and look out for more stuff from us in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.
A good event that you guys put on at the Thanksgiving breakfast today.
Oh my God, we survived.
I was shivering half the time.
So cold.
Hey. And stuff like that. How you doing? Music and good podcast. Good.